Abimelech's downfall was self-inflicted due to his unrestrained ambition, and it had devastating effects on others and himself. Whoever wants too much may end up with nothing.
This is Mission 66, taking you on a journey through the Bible based on the teaching ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao in cooperation with Transworld Radio. Let's join John Matthews and co-host Esther Sisulu as they lead us through our study in Judges, a book that highlights courage, God's sovereignty, and His ability to raise up deliverers in times of crisis. Download the free study guide at mission66.org. Now, here's Esther.
Welcome to another episode of Bible Exploration, where we're in the book of Judges. And today we're looking at chapter 9. And in this episode, we'll find the conspiracy of Abimelech. Now, he was one of Gideon's 70 sons who tried to grasp control of Shechem after the death of his father, Gideon. And so our teacher, John Matthews, will bring us the theme, Thirst for Power.
Esther, thank you so much. Thirst for power today.
Thirst for power indeed. And man, isn't it amazing that Gideon, who did what God called him to do, now bears the son, and you're going to go into it, John, but bears the son who now has this thirst, this need, this desire for control and for power.
Yeah.
The total opposite of his dad, if you would say.
Yeah, and it's something we see in society, but it's something we see in ourselves as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
This need for control. And yeah, very warm welcome to this latest episode of Mission 66. We've talked a little bit about it there. I wonder whether you've heard it said as well, this phrase, if you want something hard enough, you can achieve it. Put your mind to it and you can do it. There's a lot of me in there, isn't there? You know, and I wonder, is that really the case? And what do we miss whilst we're fixated with chasing so single-minded a goal? Well, we're talking around that and about that today because we're going to be exploring whether this is true in the life of a man who desperately wanted to be in control, but in the end it was his thirst for power that controlled him. It is the story of Abimelech, who is one of the many sons of Israel's sixth judge, Gideon. So this is Judges chapter 9, so let's read. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, "Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh." And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem. And their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and he killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. What a story that is. Reads a little bit like a movie. We've got Abimelech here, the son, as you say, of Gideon, who actually had 70 sons by several women. And notice how all the accounts of polygamous families in the Bible, well, they usually pretty much result in family chaos with rivalry among the women and no sense of brotherhood whatsoever among the sons, only this sibling rivalry that ends up destroying them, right?
Yeah, it does. And it's quite unfortunate to see the disunity there.
Yeah, it is. And this story, I'm afraid, is no different. And without the support of his brothers on his mother's side, or indeed his closest relatives, Abimelech then seeks to establish a kind of dynasty from his father Gideon, with himself as the king of his generation. So Abimelech thirsts for power, even though Gideon as you said at the start, never intended for that to happen. And to achieve his goal, Abimelech sparks this rebellion and, shockingly, he murders all his brothers. And sometimes when we read the Bible, it does feel so familiar, almost as if we're watching today's news, right? And so this is verse 6, and it says, "And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. But remember, amidst this plotting, confusion, and indeed Abimelech's thirst for power, one of Gideon's sons, Jotham, the youngest of the brothers, had managed to escape the massacre of his brothers." And here we are in verse 7, where it says, "When it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and cried aloud and said to them, 'Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my abundance, by which gods and men are honoured, and go hold sway over the trees? And the tree said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go hold sway over the trees? And the tree said to the vine, you come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So Jotham is using this allegory to speak directly against Abimelech's ambitions. Abimelech here is compared to the thorn bush, which is utterly unfit to rule over any trees. And on Jotham goes in verse 16 by saying, now therefore, if you have acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, for my father fought for you, and risked his life, and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men, on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer and lived there because of Abimelech, his brother. It's a pretty sad story, hey? And we see, don't we, how Abimelech's desire clashes with God's will. And we know that God has ultimate control over history. But here's Abimelech seeking power for himself. He destroys his own family in the process. Wow. And so this was not the only time that we see in history such a thing being done. And here Jotham openly challenges Abimelech's fitness to rule after what he had done, after such a power grab. No foundation, really, for any kind of security. And then verse 22, Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. And what happens? God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. So we see this tangled mess. And we know God's power extends over the whole world, and yet in his sovereignty, he allows judgment to unfold, using even the bitterness between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem to bring that about. And so what follows is, here we go again, a series of betrayals, battles, destruction. And the text reveals that a man named Gaal, son of Ebed, becomes a central figure in this chaos. And Gaal teams up with Abimelech's officer Zebul to escalate the conflict, leading to yet more bloodshed. So let's skip down to verse 34, where it says, "So Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city. And Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, 'Look, people are coming down from the mountaintops.' And Zebul said to him, 'You mistake the shadow of the mountains for men.' Gaal spoke again and said, 'Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company is coming from the direction of the diviner's oak.' And then Zebul said to him, 'Where is your big mouth now? You who said, "Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?" Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them.' And so Gaal went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him. And many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Arumah. And Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not dwell at Shechem. On the following day, the people went out into the field, and Abimelech was told. He took his people, and he divided them into 3 companies, and he set an ambush in the fields. And he looked and saw the people coming out of the city. So he rose against them and killed them. Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while the 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the field and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it. And he razed the city and sowed it with salt. And when all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of this, they entered the stronghold of the house El-Berith. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwood and took it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, "What have you seen me do? Hurry and do as I have done." So every one of the people cut down his bundle, and following Abimelech, put it against the stronghold. And they set the stronghold on fire over them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. And then Abimelech went to Tebez, and he encamped against Tebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women and all the leaders of the city fled to that tower, and they shut themselves in, and they went up to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower, and he fought against it, and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, saying to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, 'A woman killed me.'" And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he'd committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So there you have it, Abimelech. Pretty sad story, isn't it? Meeting this tragic end, and it ends with his head being cracked with a millstone that's dropped from the top of this tower. And in the end, a tragic end for a man who was consumed by his thirst for power.
You know, when I hear this, John, I think of the expression, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And it kind of feels that that's how Abimelech lived his life and ultimately died.
Yeah, certainly it had that inevitability about it in a way, doesn't it? As all those stories ultimately do, you know, evil will not last for too long.
That's right.
Because good will always overcome evil, because God is ultimately, he is Lord of all, right?
Praise the Lord.
You know, so we know that. And I don't know, listeners may be tuning in, and there may be a lot of darkness around them in their land, in their families, in their lives. But we know that the light always overcomes the darkness.
Yes.
And so that hope is sure and steadfast, and the darkness flees. You know, it says in the Bible, if you resist the devil, he will flee
from you. Yeah, he will.
Yeah.
And dear friend, this is Mission 66. This is your place to come to receive the encouragement from the Bible. And my name is Esther. I'm your host, and we're with our teacher, John Matthews. And I think some questions need to be answered because there is a lot happening in this chapter 9 of Judges. Now, John, do you think that Abimelech was, at the very least, perhaps he thought that he was doing something right by taking the throne, possibly to avenge the death of his father?
Maybe he thought he was trying to do the right thing by usurping authority. But the fact that he murdered 70 of his brothers in reality reflects a deep darkness, doesn't it?
Yeah, the condition of his heart.
Absolutely right. And, you know, they found out in the end that I'm talking about the people of Shechem as well, they'd all been horribly rebellious and sinful, and so they were to pay the price for it. And I think that's often what happens. You know, when something like this happens, sometimes people, you know, you think of how world wars came about. People go with the prevailing trends, and there's almost a darkness or a blindness that overcomes people in terms of what they will start to justify. Because maybe the leader justifies it. And it's a pretty wild story, but it's pretty typical in many ways of the accounts that we find here in the book of Judges, where there's no clear line of authority. We see that again, and it's trouble after trouble after trouble, because there's just no authority.
Yeah.
Or at least when there is, when it passes quickly, the people descend into chaos again, and everybody doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. And it does deteriorate. That's what's going to happen in the future. Now, in fact, the period of the Judges stretches over 300 years, 3 centuries. And in that period, morals deteriorate over that course of time. And, you know, each of the judges, well, they were, how would you describe the judges? They were characters.
Yes, they were.
But some of them were unusual, maybe a bit odd as well. Mm-hmm. And you're looking at me thinking that's a fine thing coming from you, aren't you? That's what you're thinking. You're like, some people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Look, the odd can relate to the odd. So
that's right.
Look, we're in this together.
Two oddities together.
That's it.
Does that make an even? Anyway, let's not go there.
Well, you know what? I do have a very technical question that I want us to get into.
Right.
Perhaps it might be an odd one for you, but hey, let's look at verse 2. Of chapter 9, because here it says that Abimelech was trying to convince the Shechemites to make him their king.
Yeah.
And he said to them, remember, I am your bone and your flesh. Okay, so what was he saying by making that statement?
Yeah, so what he's essentially saying is, look, remember, I'm your close relative. Mm. So he's trying to just convince them that he qualified to be their leader because he's related to them by bloodline.
Okay.
So
I can see why he was pitching his case in that sense.
Yeah.
So can you explain verse 22 then, where it says that an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Abimelech?
Yeah, let's go there. First of all, look, important to say God doesn't send evil spirits on anybody, because there is no evil in God. He is perfect, so he cannot tempt anyone with evil. Just like it's impossible for him to lie. God cannot lie because he is holy, holy, holy. Purity. There is no shadow of any lie or darkness in him. So the text here, though, says it's this way simply to emphasize God's sovereign power over everything, even the demonic realm. You might remember the story, or we'll get to it actually on Mission 66 of Job, where God doesn't cause the devil to attack, or at least to approach Job and his family, but he does allow it, yeah. Which is a different thing. So if anything evil occurs, it's not God who sends it, but God, as you say, allows it for reasons known to himself. We can be sure that since God, though, holds all power, knowledge, and he foresees the future, it means that the devil and the evil spirits cannot do a thing if it's not allowed by God. So the evil spirits have to pass through God's permission. It doesn't mean that God approves of evil, but God often will allow evil to happen because he intends good to come out of it. And he has a power that is much greater than evil. And he has foreknowledge that is much more knowing than evil. So he knows that good can come out of evil.
And I think it's good to make that distinction because, with questions like, why does God allow suffering? We can now get a clear picture, a holistic picture that God allows certain things to happen because they lead to good, right?
Yeah.
There's a process in which he is working things out for our good and for his glory. So I think that distinction is important to make, John.
And I'm reminded, Esther, of Genesis chapter 50. It's verse 20, which says, you intended to harm me. And that you can be a person. By and large, I think it's got the backing of the devil or things that are not of God. So that you can be quite widely interpreted. But this is how it goes. You intended to harm me, says Genesis 50, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
That's it. Mm-hmm.
So how are many lives saved? Often through the furnace, through suffering, through sometimes what we would consider unthinkable.
Yeah, those trials and tribulations.
Exactly that. And so these verses show that all spiritual powers are under God's sovereignty and control, and even the spirits that are not good can only act within the boundaries of God's will. And when it says it comes from God, well, it only means that he is the ultimate authority and everything has to pass through him before it can be made reality. In other words, they can only go so far.
Mm-hmm. John, we read something quite interesting in this text, and that is that Gideon had many wives. We know he had 70 sons, but he had many wives that bore those sons. So we call that in our context polygamy. Are there always issues that arise wherever there is polygamy?
Yeah, well, look, let's go back to the beginning, because when God created Adam and Eve, the intention was clear. It was for them to be a monogamous couple and procreate so that others after them would also be monogamous. But we do see humanity trying to tweak God's design, I suppose you could call it that, thinking perhaps more wives, the merrier. But those adjustments never worked well. In fact, they only ever led to trouble. At first, there may seem some functionality about it, but over time, as we read through the Bible, they lead to generational problems. God's ideal plan is the union of one husband, one wife, and one set of parents for children. If children come of that relationship, that would be described as a family unit as designed by the Creator. that almost seems an ideal, but when sin entered the human race, it did impact God's order. And so every time polygamy was practiced in Israel's history, as I said, it led to problems and complications. Many of the patriarchs themselves, they had multiple wives. King David, I think 9, although not at all one time. His son Solomon, followed in his footsteps in that way as well, because he pushed it even further. He was known to have 700 wives plus 300 concubines. So, King Solomon took it to the nth degree, you could say.
Okay. All right, John. Well, that was quite the story. And of course, there's some things that we can take away from our study of Judges chapter 9.
Yeah, Judges chapter 9, it's the account of Abimelech, who I suppose you could describe as the rogue son of Gideon. Why? Because he had this thirst for power, and that thirst drove him to the most treacherous extremes. He killed all of his brothers except one, and the one who escaped then prophesied his death. And we also see the sad end then that Abimelech comes to. And the account also shines a spotlight on the practice of polygamy, using Gideon's 70 sons as an example of what happens or what came out of that polygamous existence that Gideon had. And so Abimelech's downfall was, in the end, self-inflicted. It was due to his unrestrained ambition and the devastating effects that it had on himself, but also many others.
Well, it's on that good note that we conclude today's Mission 66. And my hope, friend, is that this has sparked your interest enough to have you join us on our next program at the same time and the same place as we journey through the book of Judges. Well, I'm Esther for John Matthews and our team, saying until next time, this is Mission 66.
Has God used today's program in your life? Then you'll want to receive the free study guide that's waiting for you on our website. You can get it right away by downloading it at mission66.org. At mission66.org, you can also leave a comment or make a donation to help this listener-supported ministry. When you give, you're helping listeners experience solid Bible teaching in many languages in some of the most spiritually resistant places in the world. Thank you for helping at mission66.org. Mission 66 is a ministry of Transworld Radio.